Verjetno Evaldom Flisarjem ne rabi uvode, ampak za vsak slučaj imam nekaj pripravljen. Evald je pisatelj, dramatik, esejist, urednik, prevajalec. Študiral je primerjalno književnost v Ljubljani na naši fakulteti, angleški jezik in literaturo v Londonu in psihologijo v Avstraliji. Svetovni popotnik, doslej je prepotoval 96 držav, 98 držav, to je od včeraj. Voznik podzemnega vlaka v Sydneyju, urednik, med drugim enciklopedija znanosti v Londonu, avtor kratkih zgodb in radijskih iger za BBC, predstojnik Društva slovenskih pisateljev od leta 1995 do 2002 in od leta 1998 urednik najstarejše slovenske literarne revije Sodobnost. Avtor 14 romanov, 15 romanov, jutri bo 16. Je to prav, 10 jih je bilo nominiranih za nagrado Kresnik. Ja. Tega ne bom povedal. Ja, 3 potopisov, ki veljajo za najboljše v slovenski literaturi, 2 knjig za mlade, obeh nominiranih za nagrado in 15 dram. 8 nominiranih za Grumovo nagrado, 3-krat je nagrado prejel. Prejemnik nagrade Prešernovega sklada in Župančičeve nagrade za življenjsko delo. Različne njegove dele so prevedene v 41 jezikov. Trenutno število prevodov znaša 173. Ja. Kar nekaj jih je v pripravi, med njimi v japonščino, arabščino in kitajščino, pa tudi tako eksotične, kot so bengalščina, hindiščina, malajščina, indonezijščina, nepalščina, marati in amhariščina. Avtorjeve drame redno uprizarjajo poklicne gledališče po vsem svetu. Angleški prevod njegovega romana Na zlati obali je bil nominiran za najprestižnejšo evropsko literarno nagrado, the Dublin International Literary Prize. Medtem, ko mu je 3. izdaja angleškega prevoda romana Velika žival samota, My Father's Dreams, kot enemu 6 najboljših evropskih avtorjev prislužila udeležbo na prestižni prireditvi European Literature Night v britanski knjižnici v letu 2015. Januar lani je na stroški indijske vlade preživel 3 tedne na promocijski turneji v Indiji, kjer je na 3 uglednih univerzah predaval o vlogi pisatelja v sodobni družbi, si ogledal 2 uspešni in nagrajeni uprizoritvi svojih dram v bengalščini in promoviral izdajo 3 svojih knjig. Med najlepše doživetje v svoji karieri šteje 8-dnevno promocijo prevodov 2 svojih romanov na Poljskem. Nove uprizoritve njegovih dram pripravljajo v Indoneziji, Indiji in na Japonskem. Vse vprašanja imam pripravljena v slovenščini, ampak sem se odločil, da bo rajše angleško govoril. In midva se poznava kar dolgo in ko sem rekel, da bo pogovor v slovenščini, Evald je bil malo presenečen in je rekel, no, je čisto verjetno, da se bom preklopil v angleščino. Tako da bom začel z angleško vprašanje. India. India's a country that's...
Big country, India.
Big country, slightly bigger than Slovenia.
Yes, I'm surprised now because I was hoping that we would use Slovene, which you speak perfectly, by the way. Yes, I mean, you surprised me.
All right.
But if you insist on English, let it be English. What was I going to say about India?
No, I was going to ask you a question.
Sorry.
Okay, you're a frequent visitor to India. How large is the cultural gap? And how easy is it to bridge?
Well, there was a cultural gap in 1974 when I first came to India, but if I go to India now, there's hardly any. I can't, I mean, they have, it is a modern country, it is a Western-oriented country. English is their lingua franca because especially the Tamils in the south will not accept Hindi as their language. So basically they have to use the language of their former masters to get along with each other. And also they have now reached the stage that Slovenia was at, you probably don't remember, you're all very young, but in the 70s in Slovenia books were sold by the meter. Why? Because people suddenly in the 70s, we had a good life. I still remember it. And people had all these empty shelves in their flats and they had to fill them. So they were buying books by the meter. Of course, they never read them. The same thing is now happening in India. The middle classes have exploded. And also, for example, last year alone, the number of English books published and sold in India rose by 500% within a single year. It's hard to imagine, considering that, I mean, even Ian McEwan said recently that the sale of fiction books fell by 35% in the last few years in England. So I'm surprised that there are so many people sitting here. I was expecting 2 or 3.
We paid them.
You paid them. And so you should.
Didn't you tell me the other day that India is now the largest English language book market? Is that correct?
It is, yeah.
Right.
It is, yes.
So it does make sense to divert a lot of your energy towards India.
Well, I'm not diverting any energy. I mean, no energy is needed. You do need energy when you get to India to avoid mosquitoes, to suffer the heat, and but then you're rewarded by excellent food and friendly people and publishers who want to publish your books, or theaters that want to do your plays and so on. So it's a mixture of both, you know. But
you mentioned as well a reading with 1,200 people present.
No, that was the Jaipur, the annual Jaipur book fair, which is the largest in the world. In 5 days, it was visited by 4 million people. It's unimaginable. And obviously, when you read in the open like this, you see a huge crowd of people, and it's an unusual experience.
Are the reactions different from reading? You mentioned Poland, for instance. I mean, what's the difference between doing a promotional tour in Poland and in India?
There's only one difference in the number of people that attend events. In India, there are always crowds, and in Poland also, I must say, the Poles are very, very interested in literature. And the Warsaw Book Fair is one of the nicest and most visited in the world as well. And it was at the Warsaw Book Fair that within 1 hour I had to sign 130 books in translation. I mean, I do go to book launches in different countries, but this never happened anywhere else. I mean, I've been to book launches where I didn't have to sign a single book.
But I mean, do people in India, what do they know about Slovenia? Are they familiar with the country? Or?
They think of us as Europeans. It's interesting to mention, I just remembered why in France they haven't put on stage any of my plays, not a single one. Their excuse was, I have it in writing, you are not Eastern European enough. So there are so-called old Western European countries that think that we, that once belonged to what they thought of as Eastern Europe, although we are of course not Eastern Europeans, we are Central Europeans, should only be allowed to write about certain things, about dissidents and the war and independence, transition and so on, but not about simple human relationships, which is what my plays and also novels are mostly about. But in India, of course, they regard me as a European, which is what I am.
Yeah. I was going to ask a question actually about how easy it is to translate the humour in your writing, particularly in the plays. And I wonder, is that also a problem for the French, that they don't get your rather black sense of humour?
Well, the French, they have their own sense of humour. I'm not very familiar with it, but I think the French are simply incapable of understanding English sense of humour. The history shows that.
Yeah.
But speaking of humour, Japan is a case in point. They've done 4 of my plays so far. The first one, What About Leonardo, was the best. But I went to the opening night in Tokyo and was astonished, completely astonished, because this is a very funny play until the very end when it turns tragic. But in Tokyo, throughout the entire performance, not even a giggle. Deadly serious. So I thought, my God, the director must have done something really terrible. And afterwards, when I asked him what went wrong, he said, nothing went wrong. Everybody was very pleased. I said, but why didn't they laugh? And he said, laugh? In Japan, we do not laugh at mentally disturbed people. This is simply not done.
Yeah.
I mean, out of respect for the mental problems of the patients on stage, they did not dare to laugh.
And have you experienced that in other countries, that there are things that we will laugh at in Europe, or maybe we'll laugh at in Britain, that in Asia would be seen as something totally unacceptable?
Not to that extent, no. What the English laugh at, Slovenes will laugh at, and Indonesians will laugh at, Indians will laugh, to a greater or lesser extent. And but that's not the point. I mean, the point is that people walk out of the theatre then with different feelings, different understandings of what the play is about.
Yeah.
And the productions differ depending on their culture. For example, in Cairo, they even came with Nora to the festival of drama in Krain. And some people said, of course, Slovenes are always the best. You know, when it comes to theatre, our theatre is the best in the world, and everybody else simply cannot do it as well. So they said, but are these amateurs? I mean, it was a professional theatre. But they were waving around them and they were shouting and so on and so on. And they said, why are they doing this? I mean, can't they, this is how amateurs act. I said, no. Go to Egypt, walk around the streets of Cairo, and you will see that this is how people communicate. Watch their television programs, watch their dramas, and you will see that this is the way they communicate. Like the Italians are just waving their arms about to a great extent, to a much too great extent for my. But there you are. This is, you see, it's very difficult. The style of acting. Now in Indonesia, in Java, for example, they have a 3,000-year-old history of dramatic arts. But if you watch a play produced in Jakarta, it's like it was produced by their former colonial masters, the Dutch. It's completely European production and understanding, and the audience will understand it in the same way.
Have you watched any of the Turkish telenovelas that have suddenly become...
No.
No.
No. I still remember when I was a little boy, and well, there was very little food at the time. There were certain things I would not eat. And my mother used to say to me, eat it up or the Turks will take you away. And somehow from a very early age I developed this idea that Turks are something horrible, you know, that you must be afraid of them. And when I first came to Turkey, during my overland journey from Australia, that was in 1975, in Istanbul, which I found a very modern city even then, I urgently had to go to the toilet, public toilet, but didn't have a coin to put in. And one gentleman, Turkish gentleman, walked past and saw my predicament and offered me a coin. And I said to myself, my God, maybe my idea of the Turks that I got from my mom was not really entirely correct. But I still will not watch Turkish telenovelas because I do not watch telenovelas.
Have any of your plays been staged in Turkey?
No. Books. One novel is going to be published, and short stories will be published. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Right. I was going to ask you a question about Joe Orton. Probably, I don't know if the students have heard of Joe Orton. He was very, very popular and influential playwright in Britain. Famous really for his black humour, and I wondered if his work had any influence on yours.
Well, I'll have to disappoint you. Yes, to some extent, but my last play, comedy about the end of the world, is actually dedicated to Joe Orton because one of the characters in the play is called Joe Orton.
It's called Joe Orton, right.
And it is to some extent written in his style with the same sort of black humor.
Yeah.
But other than that, having lived in London for 20 years, obviously, and I was actually trained by the BBC to write plays. Mm-hmm. Not only Joe Orton, but all major contemporary British playwrights have had very decisive influence on my style and on the structure of my plays, and especially on the dialogue.
Yeah.
Very often, because you see, novels can be translated by anybody who has the potential to be a writer himself. That is the condition for a good translation. So I imagine that you are also, in your spare time, you are scribbling away on your first novel.
My first novel is still being created, but anyway.
But plays, I think, must be translated by theatre people. For example, 11 of my plays have been translated into German by a theatre director who then actually directed them. And when I was in London and started to send my radio plays to BBC, first there was no response, then there were rejections, then they called me in and they said, "You're in a good way, but you still have to work." But I was a student, I didn't have any money, so they said, "Look, here is a novel, turn this into a 90-minute radio play." So I said, fine. And there's a lot of dialogues in this novel, so I simply copied them. And I brought it in and I said, here it is, and waited a few days, and the editor called me and he said, come in, we'll have coffee and a chat. So I went in and he said, one thing you must remember, there is dialogue for the eyes, you find that in the books. There is dialogue for the stage, within theatre, that is dialogue for the stage. And there is dialogue for the ear, which is radio play. They are all different. So all this dialogue that you copied from the book is dialogue for the eyes, and you will have to rewrite it entirely so that it is suitable for the ear. So they were very patient and very polite, and ultimately, after a year or so, they produced the first of my plays. I learned to write for the radio, and then later also for the stage, and ultimately also I managed to discover how to write dialogue with the eyes.
Have there been any productions of your plays, especially in distant lands, which have surprised you or made you see the drama in a totally different light?
Yeah, there have been productions that have greatly disappointed me, and there have been productions that have delighted me. But it's very difficult to know what you are going to see, because even theatres that have done one of your plays extremely well will completely ruin the next one. And to return to Japan, they did a play again. Unfortunately, they came to the Festival of Drama and Crime. The Nymph Dies, which is based on the old myth of Tristan and Isolde. The Japanese do not have anything like that, anything similar in their history. So what they did, they rewrote half of the text, and when they came here and the text had to be prepared for subtitles in Slovene, the Japanese translator read it and said, this is not your play. And what was even worse was that the person who wrote the new script was not a playwright, he was just somebody. So I said to the director, who is must have been a sumo wrestler in his former life, he needs 2 seats on the bus. So I was quite afraid to tell him off, but I said, you are never going to do any of my plays again. But he did.
All right.
Yeah. He did the comedy about the end of the world, and then I got a letter from one of the actresses. We are so unhappy. Only 90% of your text has remained. Everything else has been rewritten. So I said, thank you very much. And now he wants to do another one. Now he promises that he will not change a single word.
Do you have any influence? I mean, do you have to give approval for your plays to be performed?
There is a contract, of course, but
you don't have any control over what they do with it?
Yes, it is all clearly stated, but they just disregard it. So what can I do?
Yeah.
It's too far to go to beat them up, you see.
Coming back to different languages, which are the most, I don't know, distant or exotic languages, if you like, which not just your plays but your novels have been translated into?
You mentioned a few before, Amharic, which is spoken.
Oh, sorry. Go on. Yeah.
Yeah, which is spoken when the offer came. I must shamefully admit, thinking of myself as a relatively educated person, that I had never heard of this language. And then I discovered that it's spoken by 70 million people in Ethiopia, and it's one of the oldest Semitic languages, one of the oldest writings available. So I was pleased, of course. And Amharic. Now, Tamil is one of the languages that is Malayalam in Kerala. The book has just been published.
Right.
Vietnamese, and of course Arabic, Japanese, Indonesian. These are all exotic languages for me. And Icelandic. Mustn't forget Icelandic.
Right.
Yes.
The Amharic translation was from English.
80% of my plays and novels are translated from English.
Right. So English is a relay language.
Absolutely.
How you know, the Chinese whispers effect or telephone check, how distant does the let's say Amharic translation or other translations from English get from the Slovene original? Do you even know? Does anybody know?
Well, I must admit that my knowledge of Amharic is limited by the fact that now I know that Amharic exists. But I can't check my translations in Arabic. I can only check my translation. I check your translation.
Yes, I know.
And when your translation, remember, your translation was published in America, it came back all red because they Americanized it.
Yeah.
And you objected. And I objected. But the publisher said, sorry, this is the American market. It must be American English.
Yeah.
As they say, one nation divided by a common language. And now also by the husband of a well-known former Slovenian model, who is also doing his best to divide the two countries.
We won't say any more.
We won't go into politics now.
No. Although Donald Trump and I do have in common that we have Slovene wives, I hope we have nothing else in common.
We will see.
Certainly not hairstyle, anyway. With regard to European languages, you mentioned French and drama. Where have you enjoyed most success in Europe? Putting Britain aside for the moment.
Oh dear. You see, I don't think about these things in terms of success. I don't compare numbers and so on.
Well, where have you had several works
for
published?
example, 11 plays produced in German translations, but we are part of this cultural area, have been for centuries, so we do understand each other. It's not a problem, and Poland is the same. England, Ireland, difficult to say. Europe is Europe, you see. So there are no great differences. We understand each other, except when it comes to trade and politics.
Do you think Britain is part of Europe, or?
Yes, Britain is definitely part of Europe. Being a British citizen myself, as well as Australian and Slovenian, of course. Yes, Britons are Europeans, whether they like it or not.
Were you surprised by the Brexit vote?
Not only surprised, but greatly disappointed.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Something I noticed, I think it was last year, looking at one or two reviews, there seemed to be a lot of very positive reviews your translations of your novels in Ireland, and I wondered if there was a special kind of relationship, if you like, between Ireland and Slovenia in a way that differs from England.
No, that was a review of the book published in England.
Oh yes, I know.
Yes, but we are both nations of poets and drunkards. That's why I always say them. Yes.
No, it's often when I speak to people from Slovenia who visited Ireland, they say they feel very much at home there in a way that they may not feel in England. That there is some kind of chemistry between the Irish and the Slovenes, apart from the weather.
Well, maybe because of history, because they were oppressed by the British and we were oppressed by our larger neighbours to the north. And in England, unfortunately, because you are English, I don't want to insult you.
No, you insult me if you want.
The English still nurture this idea that they had a great empire and that somehow they still have it, and that somehow anybody who comes to England is in one way or another a slightly lesser person than the English are. You will agree with me that that's the case.
Yes, there is a
I felt that when I lived in London, I felt that all the time.
Yeah.
And when I edited this Encyclopedia of Science, I had a colleague who came to me because I was actually proof editing texts written by scientists who are very, very clever and know the subject, but they don't know how to write and they make horrible mistakes.
Yeah.
So I was just correcting those mistakes. So one of my colleagues came to me and said, so how do you do it? Do you first translate it into Slovene and then correct it and translate it back into English? So I said, that's exactly how I do it.
Did your years in Australia and Britain, I mean, how much did they shape you as a writer? Do you have any feeling for that, or is it difficult to?
Everything shapes me. Relationships, friends, events, travels, anything unusual, injustices you have to suffer, that we all have to occasionally. Obviously, if I had stayed here and perhaps if everything went all right, ended up as a journalist or professor of literature at the Faculty of Philosophy, my writing would have been completely different.
Yeah.
You cannot avoid, you're not aware of the influences that you absorb as you travel around the world. And through the events that actually catch up with you, or that you catch up with them, you never think about it. But it does show in your writing, it's inevitable.
It's quite unusual for Slovene novels to be set in other parts of the world, isn't it? I mean, quite a number of yours are. Or maybe I have this impression because of the ones I've translated.
You're quite right.
Yeah.
But, what can I do? I mean, should I apologize for it?
No. I mean, in a way, I always think of you. I've often wondered, do you see yourself as a Slovene writer? Is there such a thing as a typical Slovene writer, or?
There must be, but I would find it very hard to describe one, or even name one. And I'm certainly not a typical Slovenian writer because a lot of I know more about things. I can recite passages from Shakespeare for an hour and a half if you want me to right now. But I know very little about Slovenian literature, I must shamefully admit, in front of this audience who will now suddenly say, what on earth are you doing on this stage, if that is the case. But the fact is that I was educated in England, I was educated in Sydney, where I was lucky enough to be able to drive underground train, thereby learning more than at any university in the world. And even now, if I'm stopped by the police for speeding, and they say profession, and I suddenly hear myself saying train driver. And they say, oh yes, Slovenian railways, and I say, no, Australian. It never ends very well.
Yeah, we have the expression in English, the University of Life, which, so this was your part of your University of Life, driving the train.
But I mean, it is for everybody of us. I mean, we learn certain things at the university or at any school, basically, and forget most of that. Thank God that we can forget most of that. But then we learn as we go through life. Every day we learn something new, and every day we are different people. We are a succession of people. Basically, we are never this idea of I and constant identity. This is an illusion. It doesn't exist.
This thing of identity is often a theme of your novels.
Yeah.
Is that partly because of your own situation, where you don't have in a sense, a single clear identity as let's say, you know, a purely Slovene author who's spent his whole career working in Slovenia, and in many ways you're very kind of English, I always think. Or certainly England has had a lot of influence on you. And maybe Australia as well, which I don't know Australia, but...
Well, that's a funny thing, you see. Other people think about my writing and analyze it often with insufficient knowledge and insufficient dedication, but that happens to every writer. I'm not an exception here. But I myself don't. I don't think about the way I write, why I write this, why I write that, and so on. I cannot look at myself and at my work from outside, and I'm afraid of doing that. There is an anecdote that I keep telling, probably some of you have heard it as well. Truman Capote was asked the same question: how do you do it? I mean, how do you start, how you continue, etc. How do you structure your novel and so on? And he said, he told them a story about a centipede who was asked, how can you walk with 100 legs? It's difficult enough to walk with 2. And the centipede said, but that's very simple. First I put forward the 32nd on the left, and then the 64th on the right, and then suddenly a centipede couldn't walk anymore. I'm afraid of thinking even about the method of writing that I use. I just write. And then I reread it and I change it, and occasionally, in fact quite often, smetarji odpeljejo marsikaj, kar napišem.
Do you start with a character or a plot idea or an incident, or does it vary from one?
It's different. If it's a play, you start with the ending. And then you set out to find a suitable, believable reason for this particular kind of ending. You start at the end and then go to the beginning. But with the novel, you somehow, in the middle of the night, wake up with some sort of person, in dreams or sort of ruminations on the border of sleep and so on. A figure, a shape of a human being suddenly presents itself in front of your eyes. And you know that you will have to do, you've got a new friend. And then you go on a journey. And when you go on a journey with someone, with your friend, imaginary friend, things happen. Like on every journey. He doesn't know what's going to happen, you don't know what's going to happen. But things happen. And once things happen, they cause other things to happen. So after you have traveled for a certain time, or a certain number of pages, you both realize that you've had enough, and then you finish the novel.
So
this is the difference between plays and novels.
Yeah, so you never have a kind of, you don't sit down, you don't have a clear plan as
or
to
synopsis.
Yeah, or whatever, you know, but sometimes you see this advice for writers, you know, and preparing some kind of flow chart and advice about
I work intuitively.
plot development and this kind of thing.
When people ask me what the book is about, tell us in a few words and so on, I'm superstitious. I never do that, because once I do it, for me, the novel is finished.
Yeah.
I've written it. I've told the story.
Yeah.
And I have somehow locked my hands, because I don't know how it's going to end and which way I will take, and or my character. About halfway through, I start following the character. For the first half, I lead him, I egg him along, I say, let's go this way, let's go that way. And then suddenly, he says, no, I don't want to go that way, let's go this way. And I follow.
Do you have to like the main character?
Even if you hate him, even hate is a kind of, perverse kind of love, really. You know, if you hate your character, you can do wonders with that character. You know? And then ultimately, you come to love him. Because he's so obnoxious, he's so horrible.
Is it like I don't know, a father-son relationship that, you know, you can accept things from your own children which you wouldn't accept from anybody else?
Well, now you got me. I am lucky enough at my age to have an 11-year-old son who's a computer genius. He teaches me everything about this and that and so on and so on. And in many ways, he is my father. You know, the child is the father of the man. And I listen to him, and we are friends, and he's not a child for me. He's a child, basically. I have to take care of him. But in many ways, I am a child for him as well, because every now and then he will say to me, Daddy, you are stupid. This is not true. And I will tell you how it is done. And he doesn't.
Yeah.
So it's a wonderful friendship. You see, it's nice to have a friend in the family. We'll slowly draw to a close. I'll try and bring the discussion back a bit. You will have to, because we are now in the second half, and you, as the character, will have to conclude it. You see.
I shall. Yes. I shall. Hopefully with a happy ending. I know what discussions we've had, obviously, but I'm just curious how much discussion you have with translators about your work. How engaged you get, or do you feel once you've found a translator and they're working, unless they have questions, then they should just get on with it?
Oh dear, oh dear. My knowledge of languages is very limited. I speak English and German. So I read your translation of American Timothy Pogacar's translations, or German translations, and occasionally I have a thing or two to say.
Yeah.
Things do go wrong. But how can I talk to my Arabic translator, to my Indonesian translator, to my Japanese, to my Chinese translator?
No, I wondered if they contacted you and said, you know, we don't understand this, or this isn't clear, or do you mind if we do this?
It hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. No. Probably they just they're quite happy with the wrong translation. I don't know. I have no way of checking. I do ask, for example, I asked a few Arab friends to read my books and plays in Arabic, and they said pretty good. But the translator is actually a professor of literature at Alexandria University, so and he has translated any number of books from different languages.
Yeah.
So, but other than that, I don't. I'm forced not to care about it.
So it's just the American editors who
they do
intervene the most.
They do get on my nerves occasionally, yes. But we have agreed that you will never translate any of my books for American publishers again. That's it.
The audience is mainly made up of young translators, or one or two colleagues and so on, one or two unknown faces, and you yourself have translated, particularly when you were living in England, and you've had a lot of interaction with translations. And I have to ask if you have any words of advice to close with, any words of wisdom for future translators, especially those who'd like to be literary translators.
I don't think a writer should be asked a question like that. It's, I don't actually, what makes a good translator? A good translator must potentially be a writer himself or herself. And that is the case in quite a few. But we know that, for example, every now and then I get an offer. I speak quite a bit of Slovene. Could I translate your book into this or that language? And it's not enough. You see, I have a sister who is extremely well educated and speaks a number of languages. But to entrust her with a translation of a novel by Philip Roth, for example, would be a catastrophe. Because to be a translator, you have to be some sort of language wizard, It's not easy. Translation is actually an art in itself, and it should be regarded as such. It is the equivalent of writing an original piece of work.
Can I sneak in a message for our students? And that is, before you can be a writer, you need to be a reader. And you mentioned earlier over coffee and wine that you were involved in promoting reading. Does it worry you that often people of our generation express this concern that young people don't read anymore, or at least not literature? Do you share that worry? Or?
I do, yes, but who doesn't? I mean, civilization has taken a very unfortunate turn, to use the mildest possible expression. But then again, my son will read an English book of 200 pages within an hour. Why? Because the reward is half an hour of computer games. So he reads very fast, and every now and then says, "Oh, there is a typo here, there's a mistake."
So he's not just skimming.
But he reads very fast because then he wants the reward as soon as possible. But the contract, he respects the contract. And only once, when his mother was not at home, I said, and he was pestering me, I said, "Look, go and do some computer games for half an hour, but don't tell mommy about it." And he said, "No, that would not be fair." And that was the happiest moment in my life, I can tell you. To have a child, even he could barely speak, and he was looking around and listening what was going on, and then every now and then he'd say, "That is not right." So this is the sort of son I had. I can learn from him.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a nice note to end on. David, thank you very much for coming along and talking to us. And I wish you a great deal of success with all the new productions and readings and
To
books.
tell you the truth, I don't care anymore. I've so
Well,
much
I
behind
know,
me,
but I
yes.
can still offer you my best wishes.
Thank you.
And,
Surprisingly, what you did today is something quite unusual.
What's that?
You got me talking. I don't normally talk so much. Maybe it was a glass of wine, you see.
I think that was a good investment.
A good investment, yes.
Yes. So, thank you very much. And
Thank
It's
you.
been very nice
Thank you.
talking to you.
Thank you.